Imperator Rome was a game that truly defined the ancient period. I think it was a fair representation of what the ancient period should have been. I definitely think that this game has way more scope for expansion, that this game has a destiny that has not been fulfilled just yet. And while the game didn't profit so much as it should have, I do believe that there is a time and place. There's a time and place when fans will come back to this game, the player base will increase, and it is slowly starting to. Imperator Rome is starting to become popular because there is no game like this outside of the RTS market. Sure, there's Rome 2, but Rome 2 has a very simplified campaign mechanics and it just doesn't offer the same level of complexity that Imperator Rome does. But Imperator Rome on the surface might as well just seem that it is complex, and it is. But what it does not offer, however, is a deep dive into the full politics of each faction. Every faction more or less plays the same. Now I'm playing with Imperator Invictus, and it is a really fantastic mod. I was also playing with this mod called Sandy Brown, which I believe makes the UI really good in my opinion. And Imperator Invictus does include a lot of factions and dilemmas and missions, but I do believe that this game needs more campaign DLC. It truly needs that DLC, and it needs more. And I wish that Paradox hadn't given up on this game, because returning to this game might not be such a bad idea after all. It might be a good idea actually to return to this game and give the fans what they want. They can still make profit of this, but we live in an age where I will explain right now as to why we don't get enough strategy games set in the ancient world. Because when you make the base game, and I'll repeat it in the second point here, when you make the base game a simple bare bones type of game with not much to do, that has Rome, Greece and all the other factions, but Rome really only has a few mechanics and the other factions don't have that much mechanics as they should have, and then you want players to pay more than £60 for it, or £80 or £90, then what do you expect? And then you expect players to pay more DLC on top of that. I just don't think it makes sense. And I will explain more clearly as to why this is. I don't know what it is about this game, it just impels me to play it. I love the ancient time period. The ancient time period is perhaps one of the most fantastic time periods in order to make a strategy game. Because it is the era of war, it is the era of Hannibal, it is the era of Ptolemy and Caesar and Crassus. But sadly, Imperator does not have those DLC campaigns like Rome 2 has. Imperator doesn't have a Western Roman late empire expansion. It does not have, the wars of the Egyptians, the wars of the Nile, the wars of XYZ. We don't have those big wars. And that's what's really, I think, shameful, to say the least. You could have made so much DLC of this game that I don't understand what it is about it with developers, with strategy. I don't understand what it is about strategy developers. But when you make a game in the ancient world, you just make it with base content, you don't add any factions or anything, you leave it as it is empty, and then on top of that, you expect us to pay £60 for it, and on top of that, you don't do any DLC and then you abandon it. This is the reason why ancient games don't succeed. Because developers, they can put as much effort in the base game, and then they want everybody else to pay DLC for it. It just doesn't make sense. Give us a game with full content, fulfilling all the politics and intricacies of Roman politics. Otherwise, you're just giving us a streamlined game. This is my problem. My problem is that when you make a game in ancient antiquity, you make sure it is the most dense and heavy feature game that you can play. That will make the players sit and play for hours and hours and hours. And Imperator is somewhat dead. It's somewhat in the mid-range. It has some of those elements, but it doesn't have those elements at the same time. Yet at the same time, I've always been baffled a little bit by Imperator. Why have I been baffled? I've been baffled in the sense that sometimes I admit that I do not understand the politics and the systems of Imperator that well. I don't. And I don't claim to be an expert in it. At the same time, I'm trying to figure out whether I am role-playing the Senate, whether I'm role-playing a royal family, or whether I'm role-playing a monarchy. And this leads me to another question. Do you think that Imperator Rome is bloated, or it's not bloated at all? Does adding more content improve the game? Should there be a focus on it, maybe improving some aspects of warfare, maybe adding some types of different battle engagement scenarios, so instead of just fighting a normal land battle, your army gets ambushed, or maybe a naval invasion? That would be actually nice to see, you know? I would actually like to see naval fights on the battlefield, and in one thing they did in Victoria 3 was they added actual models to showcase the fighting that was being fought between, let's say, Prussia and France, for example, right? I would absolutely love something like that for Imperator Rome. So when I ask this question, I'm asking this. Are there too many requests for new areas or new factions or new campaigns to be added, while there could be a bit more areas to improve the current game itself? Do you think that is what we need right now? Do we need better political systems? Identify this, that each faction plays different from one another. If you play the Averni, they have a completely different user interface. If you play their politics, they have a completely different system. And the way warfare is fought, means you have a different variety of objectives to meet. You can have cultural, economic, research, and so much more. From what I understand, there are many ways to wage war at the same time. But when you wage war, the politics of war itself are not represented. So if there was a war started by, let's say, a Roman senator against a Carthaginian noble, that is not represented as well as I would like to see it. I want to see politics being tied into war. So I don't just simply declare war. When I declare war, I need some story or background behind it. I need an opinion between factions. Let's say that if I declare war against Syracuse, there has to be a faction for it and against it. Type of victories, you can have small scale wars, you can fight for borders, you can declare war if you want, you can raise levies instantly, but you have to be careful that you need to support that army with logistics, with food, and you have to make sure you're winning, because the AI can be really, really cunning. The AI, let's say you want to attack Etrusca. You think, okay, Etrusca is an easy target as Rome. I want to go and expand. But then you find the Etruscans are sending their allies. They instead allied with Carthage. I thought, okay, I'll deal with Carthage. Then Carthage and everybody pretty much, and then everybody ganged up on me. And that's the thing. The enemy is also very stubborn when it wants to fight with you. So let's say you take one city, one settlement. You may think you won it, you may think you've occupied it, but you have to wait a couple of let's say years, a couple of months maybe. And then once you finally occupy it, then the AI will come back with more armies against you. So you really have to be careful as to how you expand. In the early game at least. Once you've expanded to a full empire, then who's going to stop you? You will be playing the might of Rome. Or, if you wanted to play other factions, you can. What I seriously love though, is that this game allows you to play a period of multitude of factions. Something that you normally wouldn't get that much, I think, in Rome 2. And Imperator has this, that it has a number of interesting options. You know, some strategy games will require you to basically win at the start. Other strategy games may not want you to win at the start. And in Imperator, you can go either way. You could lose a few wars, try and implement a few strategies here and there, and then you could do so much more. The more I talk about this game, the more features I read about it, you realize that even though some of the mechanics may be a bit bare bones, it's enough to create interesting stories. I think what the developers did, what Pavel did, was absolutely brilliant in sort of restructuring and refixing Imperator Rome. That's what was needed at the time. Imperator Rome has that. But I do think that Imperator Rome, what it needs right now, is more factions, more cultures, and more missions. And perhaps some more balancing in between. I think that would be also great as well. because Imperator is part economic simulator, part political simulator, part, let's say, families and scheming simulator. It's a combination of all three. But sometimes I feel that there hasn't been enough added to families and politics so much that I feel like there needs to be more of that. And that's what's amazing about this game. That the fact is that it makes me want to play more and more and more. It makes me want to discover what else can I paint my empire with. The main problem is that the game's tutorial, the game itself, is buried underneath tooltip after tooltip after tooltip, right? The user interface sort of hides that great mechanics that can be used. One could say that the game is not that immersive compared to Rome and maybe a few factions. But then I would say, well, it depends on how you want to play these factions. You can, in the meanwhile, play it with Total War, so you can still have that, faction role-playing element. And Invictus does help a lot. Most of the gameplay footage you're seeing here is from Invictus, with dilemmas and missions. I really do like that. But I feel as if they need to add way more immersion into this game, and they should definitely revisit Imperator Rome. If you want a game that is set in the ancient world, if you want a game that is completely amazing, then yes. But at the same time, its cons will be it is complex to understand, it is not easy to get to grips with at first, the user interface is very stiff, user interface does take a lot of explanation, and eventually the way you learn this game is by watching plenty of YouTubers, but also you will discover this game by yourself, more or less. And that's what I'm doing right now. So that's why I'm returning to Imperator. This game may still have a chance for Imperator to return and become the great grand strategy game that we all want it to be. That's all my thoughts I wanted to say on this game. I've been harboring these thoughts for a very, very long time. And let's have a great discussion in the comment section down below. And let's have a good discussion. So don't forget to leave a like, share, comment and subscribe. I shall see you on the next video.